another episode of Trade Stylist, the place where we craft your trade. Um, as we know, this is week of 24, February 2024, and we start as always with the risk disclaimers. That number one, all views are personal, and that there is a potential of you losing more money than what you invested in this. So hello once again, I am Devajyoti, better known as DJ, and I'm here to help you craft your trade. And you can find me at the Trade Stylist on YouTube, Instagram, and X, which used to be Twitter. So we always start with a prayer. May the trading gods be with us always. And then we move to our market update. So this is about how the markets moved over the week. And we start with Robusta and Arabica, both of which are down by 3.5 and 5.5%. Seems to be that finally the coffee rally is losing steam, and probably positions have been moved out, and we might be setting up for a trade here. Cocoa London, Cocoa US still reaching meteoric heights, highest ever trade numbers, driven primarily by a huge shortage, but also by hedge fund play. Orange juice up again over 3% over last week. Cotton slightly down, sugar slightly down by 0.6 and 1.9%, end up at 93.38 and 22.63. In the grain side of the business, corn down by almost 4%, breached the 400 mark. Wheat slightly up by 2.1%, and then soybean oil, soybean meal all significantly down again, with soybean being closer to the 1100 mark compared to the 1200 mark where we were. Soybean oil also down to 44, and soybean meal also down to 328.5. YTD basis, softs complex still stays strong. Cocoa London and Cocoa US obviously leading the pack. Orange juice also slightly up, and now Arabica, as we see, finally over last year is negative. So we definitely need to look at how the Arabica story is playing out. Robusta still is quite high, so there is potentially quite a lot of room remaining, and sugar and cotton roughly on the positive side. But all the grains complex strongly negative, and increasingly slow for corn, which looks to be extremely bearish as of now. I think we are close to the trade peak, what is being said by the market, and here we sort of talk about the reasons, which is the what, the why, and the when, about how the commodity markets are shaping up. And if we look at the complex as a whole, soft complex, as we have been discussing over the time, that the hedge fund play has been quite strong, especially in the cocoa market, and I think to a smaller extent probably also in the coffee and the sugar markets. Cotton, the hedge fund flows have been limited. I think it's more a supply and a demand driven equation. So there are a record number of longs in terms of value that cocoa market today has. But in terms of pure contract outrights, we still have another 20-25% upside on the number of room that's remaining. That being said, there looks to be a pretty strong short covering rally from the March to the May rollovers. A lot of people are short and they need to exit their positions or basically be required to deliver to the exchange, which they don't have, and that's probably fueling further rises on the market. Moving towards the grain side of the business, corn has been the talk of the town, and there's been an excess supply of corn, in fact probably among the very high stock to usage ratio in the US especially, and the Brazilian and the Argentinian crop looks to be pretty decent, which typically tells you that the market is being under pressure, both from international buyers as well as from national buyers. So the basis as well as the outright prices for maize have been falling. It's breached the 400 mark. Adjusted for inflation, that's the lowest price in the last almost 7 or 8 years. It's below pre-COVID times, but this should typically impact inflation. However, the prices of the supermarket goods, the prices and the costs of products produced by corn have not yet reflected in the realistic space, and I think that's going to take a little bit of more time.
Moving on to the soy complex, still bearish. Soybean oil still higher than 26, 27, which it used to trade at. It's roughly at 44. Soybean meal, on the other hand, looks to be getting undervalued. And I think if soybean meal comes down below 300, it would be a good play to start going long, depending upon the situation then. Soybean, on the other hand, has held up. We've seen pretty recently, for those who follow the markets, that soybean has traded even the low sevens, which is 700 range at some point of time, and it is right now at 1135 as we saw, which is still tells us that there is quite a lot of room to go. I don't think it goes down there unless and until the crop looks really positive, but even with that, something has to be really go wrong for it to breach below 900, to be fair. Unless and until the crop looks really positive, but even with that, something has to be really go wrong for it to breach below 900, to be fair.
Moving on, we look at the trader peak, which are basically the headlines. Well, number one is the hedge fund stampede has gone into cocoa to fuel record prices. USDA says there are more soybeans, less corn in wheat acres. This is as per the USDA report, and that's also looking at how the markets have stayed up. So because of corn being completely under pressure, of course, more people are moving into soybeans, which are holding up better. Brazil's Paranaguá port, which is one of the larger ports, has been hit by fires and 3 berths have been affected. This is primarily affecting exports. And then we have news coming out of the EU Agricultural Commissioner, who is proposing a policy shift, and this is related to the massive farmer protests which have been going on across Europe, which still continue, by the way. And we do think that this still has some steam and it will have political repercussions. Ukraine grains blockade to neighbor nations continue. This is primarily Poland, but also Czechoslovakia now, Hungary now, who have been protesting against cheaper priced Ukrainian goods and grains, especially coming into their markets. And finally, Russia says that it has shipped almost 200,000 metric tons of free grains to 6 nations in Africa. And well, that's diplomatic strategy. But how free is the grains is something that we need to really look at. Upcoming reports this week are the
anything that is less than 10% of the total crop size is slightly harder to get, unless the neighboring country does not produce or export that commodity at all, or by any chance import that commodity at all. However, if there's a larger spike, especially there's a drop on one side, or even more than that, there's an increase on one of these sides, which typically as a nation does not produce this commodity, and that even though it might be sustained, the increase from 1 year to second is significantly higher than what they typically do. That tells us that there's possibly something happening in terms of cross-border trade, and that cross-border trade typically is facilitated by a certificate of origin fund, and and that's the risk that we need to identify. Now, how do you do this when you are actually trading the origin? And that's what's important for us, is to look at how the crop is arriving, as we call, to the ports. And that's a week-on-week or a month-on-month figure. The closer you are, the better it is to understand. And if the week-on-week figures are looking strongly positive, typically this would happen if there's a high price differential between the origins. So for example, a Cameroon to Nigeria or a Cote d'Ivoire to Liberia, there was a huge price differential between the price available in Cote d'Ivoire, which is a fixed price zone, versus the price available as a free market in Liberia. And similarly in Cameroon, the CFA used to be weaker than the Naira. It's no longer the case, unfortunately, but that's primarily driven by this. So a lot of Nigerian production, which used to be in fact one of the biggest sizes of cocoa, the production of Nigeria would be seen as increasing, while crop of Cameroon should typically come down or be set off by that amount of production that comes into Nigeria. So there are two opposite examples. In the first case, the production of Nigeria increases and shows that the number of volumes are higher, and at one point of time Nigeria is still producing more cocoa than Cote d'Ivoire, so Cameroon. While in the other case, the production of Cote d'Ivoire would come down and Liberia would increase significantly by looking at the volumes passed through. And similarly, Cote d'Ivoire to Sierra Leone produces very minimal amount of cocoa, and the total amount of exports actually are passing through or did pass through from Cote d'Ivoire to Sierra Leone at that point of time. So traceability in this entire object is all about figuring out the documentation flow and figuring out the flow of the goods. So if the documents flow do not match the funds flow, and they do not match the exact flow of the stocks, so if somebody monitors how the products are moving, and which is where the entire discussion of traceability and sustainability is coming in, it always requires from step to step to step to look at where and who are the participants involved. And if you see anything that doesn't really have a reason to be there, and you would see this in the graphic that I've made here, is that some of these arrows are pointing into different places which don't really lead to a certain location. And typically that tells you that there probably is a situation where some isolated entity is trying to do something which has no reason to be in the trade. And that's where we need to look at it with a little more concern and a little more understanding that there might be certificate of origin frauds. It's important for the buying company, and also if you're a trader, as a selling company as well, because you might be subject to compliance risk. You might be subject to risk at the destination. You might be subject to quality risks, and you might be subject to other kind of AML and compliance risks in terms of the global portfolio as well that you're holding, especially if you're dealing with a sanctioned country from where the goods may arise or the funds may arise. So yeah, that's something that we need to always be mindful of in the certificate of origin fraud, and I hope I've given you some indicators on how to handle it. Moving on towards tradecraft, we look at the markets a little bit in a different way this week, instead of just having a theoretical or a position point of view. So we're looking this at the corn futures main, and my forecast is that the way it has been a parabolic downtrend from 457, I think this market goes down to 380. And when it does,
just two hearts running wild, never sleep, never stop. As we shout from the top, we're gonna be two hearts running wild. Now the morning is the afternoon, we lay awake in bed, the laughs so loud as the hours pass, we're gonna do it all again. We wanna chase the night, wanna dance to the light, pull the stars from the sky, just two hearts running wild, never sleep, never
8 market. Looks like a long-term head and shoulder. And it's currently off down below the 38% percentile, just below the lower quartile, which is typically not a very strong bullish scenario. So I would take a punt at it and say, okay, you know what, let's hit it at 21.75 short with definite short stop loss at 22.35 and a target of roughly 20.24. We can define or change these stop losses and take profits and move along, but I think this is where we stay on the numbers for now. So that's our 2 trade setups for this week, and I'm going to try and use more charts for people to understand how we're looking at these positions. I, however, don't trade basis charts. I only trade basis the levels. So finally, for next week, what we're looking at is trade deeper, and we will focus on soybeans. Then we look at risk management, especially managing risk with low capital, and then of course we do some more of tradecraft. So thank you once again for spending time on this, and we're once again coming to you this week from Montenegro, which happens to also be my home. I hope I've been able to handle and give you some more value for your weekend, and look forward, I hope, to the next episode, which comes out on the 2nd of March 2024. So thank you, wish you a happy weekend, and happy